color pencils have no graphite at all.
Wow. Okay. So they're technically they're not quite pencils in that sense. They're crayons.
No, they're actually more of a crayon with a wooden casing. Welcome to Stationery Test Drive. I'm Samir.
I'm Vishal.
This is Minjal.
And today we are going to be talking about the Staedtler color pencils, the Staedtler Luna color pencils, which are water soluble. But before we get to that, Minjal, what have you been up to?
So I've been taking classes in Gujarati calligraphy. A gentleman who goes by the name of Vipul, I think his Instagram handle is Vipul Calligraphy, takes online classes, and I've just started learning from him, and it's been very interesting.
These are fantastic. And the Gujarati script, this is the modern Gujarati script, yes?
No, not really. I've used a pen that has been modified.
Okay.
For writing the Gujarati script, but this is how the script essentially is.
Because I think Samir and I have heard of there's a script called Modi, and then there's, I guess this one is more based on Devanagari, or
this is based on Devanagari. Yes.
I think the Gujarati script is similar to Devanagari and also originally based on the Brahmi script, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Please correct us in the comments if you know more about this, and we'd love to hear that. Samir, what have you been up to?
I have been working on a website called contentdeliverance.com. Besides geeking out about stationery, my day job is to do with providing technical support and solutions to people like museums, art galleries, and archives. And Content Deliverance is my project that's mostly to do with sharing the solutions I find and the general ideas about using the internet, online resources, software to solve a lot of these technical problems that artistic institutions have.
So these are all cultural institutions that you've done work for, or solutions that you found while you were figuring things out. Can you give us an example? Like, I know you worked on something called a collections management system.
Right. So we have worked, Vishal and me have worked with museums who have collections of objects. So a collections management system, for example, is a system that lets you record all of the details, the provenance, the imagery, the media, all sorts of details that would go into making a complete database of a collection.
So this, instead of using an Excel sheet for saving everything, this is a more robust solution.
Exactly.
Okay, I think there's definitely some overlap in people who are artistic and technical in our audience, and they should check out Content Deliverance to find out more.
Yes.
And I have been putting together ideas and initial preparatory work on a anthology of comics that are all in some ways based on a cartoon version of me. There's things are in the scripting stage, in the sketch stage. I think I mentioned it before that I was working on something in a sort of a rough form. They're all comics, they're all absurd, they're all crazy, a little bit like me, and they all star a bespectacled version who's also a little bit like me. There's no end date for it, and I can't really say where it will be released, but it will be released as a collection. So look out for that. There should be some artwork on the screen right now showing some of that.
And when it's done, we'll be sure to feature it in a video.
Yes, we will. But today's feature are these colorful colored pencils from Staedtler. We've looked at the Staedtler Mars range before on Stationery Test Drive. These are the Staedtler Luna. Staedtler Luna 137. They have a nice gold finish on the lettering. with what looks like a candle. So I'm guessing that's where Luna comes from.
It's
No, that's actually, I think,
paintbrush.
Oh, it's a paintbrush. Okay. And that talks about or tells us the other part of this, which is that you said they're water soluble.
yeah, I think they were originally maybe just plain color pencils, but in the recent decade or so, they have been made water soluble.
Now, technically, we've talked about graphite pencils. They're not lead, and they're also not pure graphite. They're graphite and clay in a mixture with various binders. So, why are color pencils? Are they just graphite and clay and some color, or is it something else?
Color pencils have no graphite at all.
Wow.
They're,
Okay. So they're technically they're not quite pencils in that sense. They're crayons.
no, they're actually more of a crayon with a wooden casing.
Okay. But I'm guessing the mix is different enough that they don't behave like crayons, which are very waxy and
Exactly. And in fact, the mix of a wax or whatever binder is used in these and the pigment varies not just between, say, color pencils and crayons, but also between the different brands, which is why we're talking specifically about Staedtler. I'm sure we'd cover other brands eventually, but each of these has their own characteristic blend.
yeah, and the way they go down on a paper, the way they blend together. We have each prepared artworks using these particular pencils, so we just put them on the camera right now. And I think even just from a single look at this, you can tell the range of tones and textures and qualities that you can get out of exactly the same thing on three fairly similar types of paper. Samir and I think, use the same cartridge
Same
paper.
paper.
Mine is also
And
a
this is
cartridge.
also a cartridge paper. It's a
But
bit more
this
ivory.
is a
than-
bit smoother, and this one has a bit of a tooth.
Yeah. Minjal, how did you specifically get these very sharp lines on this?
So with these pencils, and we've been using them since we were in school, you press down a little harder and you're able to get these really dark lines. And what I've done is I just went over the entire pencil coloring with a wet brush,
Okay.
which is how you get, this really nice watercolor effect that you're seeing here.
Right. And sometimes these are even branded as watercolor pencils. Not these specific ones, but you do
Yeah.
get. So you just activate them with water rather than mixing them on a palette and then painting with them.
Right. So essentially, what they do is that they just replace what would normally be a wax-based binder with something that's similar but water soluble. So the
Okay.
binder is the one that kind of dissolves, and then the pigment can be spread by the water.
Right. We've been very geeky about pigments and dyes on a previous episode. I think it was a Reynolds 045 episode. So check that one out. There's plenty more to talk about this as well. Both Samir and I have leaned into the tooth, as they call it, of the paper. Samir, very specifically, I love this gradation of deep purples and pinks that you got in there. Tell us how you got that.
The trick when you have a bit of a tooth on the paper and using color pencils is color pencils are very much a medium of patience. It's just impossible to get very complex shading with them if you're in a hurry. And I'd actually say that Vishal and me have done this in a bit of a hurry.
Right.
If like I spent maybe half an hour, 40 minutes on this.
Spent an hour and a half.
But I have done much more detailed color pencil paintings, for lack of a different term, and those can take days, because what you need to do is that you need to lay down. I would call this layer number 1,
Yes.
Right.
and then you just come back the next day and then you put in a second layer and then you put in a third layer. And honestly, by the time you're done with it, if you have good enough paper and a good enough pencil,
Let's have a
you will
try
stop
at that.
seeing the texture as much, and you can get something that's extremely rendered and smooth.
Right. So I've sort of hazarded a guess at what that would end up being by first putting down, let's say, the light yellow, and then putting down the brown next to it, and then sort of, but in a very rough way, you can see the mark making in this one deliberately. I think if I went over it with a stage and messed it up with some water or some kind of other solvent and then put down a second layer
Yeah.
or third layer, I think then you could get some pretty almost photorealistic tonality to it.
So I think obviously having pencils which you can then activate with water is just a great thing to have as an artist anyway. But I'm sure part of the reason people wanted that is because to get complete coverage on any paper with color pencils takes a lot of time.
Right.
And having the ability to then make it into an instant watercolor lets you get coverage quickly. Rather
Yes.
than the many layers it would take to do that the manually.
I've kind of cheated here by using an interference pattern. If you can see here, almost really nothing quite overlaps other than in this very dark area. So I just went in with actual lines instead of what Samir did, which is much more of a graded kind of
Yeah,
where you lightly press against the paper and
exactly.
over it.
And then you go over that again with even a different color and you're as light with it.
Yeah, whereas I went for discrete strokes that I could then color in between, and that gives you almost a different third color that your eye manifests rather than or rather your brain is making it up rather than it being on the page. And that is a common technique in printing, in color printing of magazines or newspapers and things like that. You use additive sort of layers of yellow and cyan and magenta, which is sort of what we almost had a set here that was similar for those. And that's kind of what I leaned into, which you can do with colored pencils. I think that's a fascinating use of them. I do really enjoy seeing this hard line though, and the wash around it. So I think next time I will lean into the aqua side of the aquarelle.
Yeah, I just as a contrast, I mean, since Minjal has used the watercolor version of this, I kind of did the same with a previous piece that we showed on the masking tape video. And while it's great to just see how Minjal has got this very flat single color with it, which you can do. And then what you can also do is to mix multiple colors of pencil, very much like what Vishal has done here. And then if you just kind of wash over it in the same direction, you end up getting this extremely complex looking painting.
It's almost like tie-dye. It looks like, it's mixed in very complex ways.
In some ways, this is a lot easier to do than if I was actually using paints.
Absolutely. Wet watercolor mediums are hard to control with this degree of
all
let's
these
say
kind
hard,
of striations
yeah.
that I have come up with are not as difficult as they look because I used pencils.
Right.
So they're just a great medium to use in the watercolor way as well.
I suppose if we had done a second episode of this, we would try to layer these on top of watercolors then, or under watercolors and see what we can.
That is actually how they are used by a lot of people, to add in the details into watercolor paintings.
Right. And it, I guess, depending on the tooth of the paper, it will be able to handle this sort of line work over a properly dried layer of watercolor.
Yeah. Now Vishal and I grew up with actually using Staedtler pencils, which were very different from these. We didn't grow up with the Luna version. We grew up with, I don't know if they had a specific name, but they were more hexagonal color pencils.
Yeah, I had a nice set that I had gotten. Someone had gifted me for my birthday, 36 of them. I still have them. We still use them.
But Minjal grew up with Luna as a brand that she was kind of familiar with. So how did you use it when you were growing up before they were watercolor pencils?
So the first ever set that I got was gifted, and I think somebody brought it from Singapore.
Okay.
These were quite expensive when I was growing up in the 80s. So I remember getting a set of 24, and I have that set till date. I used it basically for a lot of still life painting that we were again forced to learn in school. I did not particularly enjoy drawing pots and pans and using these really nice pencils to fill in blacks and grays. But that was about the application in school.
I think, like most things in school, there's both too much time given to things and also not enough time. I don't remember any of the art teachers I had in the 2 periods of art that we got a week actually teaching us how to use watercolors like this or how to use color pencils like this.
No.
In fact, color pencils were almost frowned upon as a juvenile thing. They moved us to actual watercolors far too early. I think many kids would probably have benefited from using these to get a notion of how to blend colors and how to control line and weight.
And I think they're just a much simpler medium to test out and figure out some of the color theory as well.
Now, I didn't use any erasers on this. Are these erasable in any form?
They are mildly erasable.
I think
Like-
if you did a wet solvent, maybe you would be able to
No, I
pull
mean
out.
there were portions in some of these where I kind of went over the line before I colored, let's say, the pink in, and as long as it was light enough, I was able to erase them out. But I'm guessing if you drew something that sharp, you may not be able to erase that
Yeah.
completely.
And speaking of sharpness, pressure, color pencils are notorious, at least with someone like me who has a very heavy hand with these things, of just falling apart and breaking. Did you guys have any issues with that?
I think here we need to kind of go into a little bit about how color pencils work in general. So if you're looking at paper from like the side on microscopic view, a paper like what Minjal has used is, let's say, a small
Right.
wavy line like that. Now
And the
something
one
that we have used
is more craggy.
is 2D. So it has these
So-
mountains and valleys.
The pencil kind of catches on these peaks and valleys.
Now,
And
the thing you need to understand is that when you draw a line like this, what you're doing is flattening all of this down.
Yeah.
So you make this flat like that, and you've pushed all the grain of the paper down
So in a cross
pretty much
section,
permanently.
it's like that more.
You have
And
actually
filled it in. You're
indented the paper, so there's
Yeah.
no way to erase that beyond that point.
You'd have to scoop that out and then.
But when you're working with paper like this, the good thing about color pencils and the way you need to understand them to really use them, even the ones that are not watercolor, is that you go over the thing lightly first.
You use it almost on the side. Now, the way we're using it is almost this way.
When you
rather
do
than
that,
this way.
what you're doing is filling in that much.
You're just catching the tops of it rather than.
And then if you want to layer it further,
And people even do it, like that. It's not.
you go over it again. And then you're filling in that much. And you can mix colors, of course. This doesn't need to be the same color.
And the good thing is that unlike with paints, there's very little. There is a bit of color mixing onto the pencil you're using, but that can quickly be rubbed off or even erased or sharpened off with a blade.
So the reason that color pencils need a lot of layering on most paper is that you need to fill all of this in so that the peaks that you can see here are barely visible.
And then you need
And
to
that's
put in
when
a
you
second.
get a really rich color. So
Because-
until you go over that many layers, you are not going to get that imagined richness of color that you want.
It's like the reason the Mona Lisa is green. And you may never look at the Mona Lisa and think that's a green woman, but no, the science and the artistry of oil painting, of that kind of painting, is done very much in a way like this, where the first layer of oil paints is put down as an undertone, because skin is translucent in some way. and people's undertones can be weird colors like green. It's a
Yeah.
counterintuitive thing, but the Mona Lisa's undertone is green, and then on top of that there are various flesh tones and all that. If this is a cross section and this is the canvas,
I think some of this will be more familiar to people who are into makeup rather than art.
yes,
In a strange
exactly.
way.
The people who use makeup regularly, they will know the term undertone and what you're aiming for. Some people's undertones are quite yellow, and they need to compensate for that, or that's why certain makeup doesn't work with certain people. And that is also why back in the black and white days, very often if you actually went on a set, a lot of people would be colored blue or orange and completely wild colors. But because of the photographic process there, the way black and white film would react to people's skin, you'd get a certain look that looked perfectly normal on film. And we're straying away from the topic, but color is fascinating. We don't do a lot of color um, mediums and tools on this channel so far because we will do them, but it's a kaleidoscope, to pardon the pun, of different tools, techniques, layering. There's a vast array here. So, Minjal, what do you think you'd like to? Would you like to continue using these the way you have? Would you like to try other things with them?
What I do have in mind is trying some hand lettering, of course, with these. I see a lot of botanical artists making really gorgeous pieces. Maybe I've not seen too many of them use the Staedtler. I've seen them using maybe the Prismacolor or.
But I think that's a sort of an American thing, right? Prismacolors are more popular in America because I think they're manufactured there.
Yes.
There is that, but I think there's also a bit of that, the character of the binder and the pigment
Right.
that's very different across different
Right.
brands.
These are quite clay, I will say. I'm not even sure if that's a term, that I would not be able to get the kind of sharp points that I have gotten with a Prismacolor at some point.
Minjal, do you think that these would be good for lettering, the Staedtler Luna specifically?
I think absolutely. I will, and using this technique where, I can apply a little pressure and maybe use this as the outline and then fill in, the letters with maybe a lighter, gradation like this. That would be a good experiment.
Okay.
And also, I think the good thing is when we were growing up, these were not available easily. These are now very economical, available, in a set of 12, 24, 36, 48. There's a nice little brush that is a part of the pack.
Right.
They also give the numbers. The colors are mentioned. So, I think we as adults don't really use crayons, color pencils very often. So it would be nice to really bring these out and, just use them more.
We as adults have also not covered the elephant in the room of the last decade or so, which was adult coloring books. We have drawn our own things, but that is an entirely, that's a huge market. Maybe we'll even do a stationary test drive on adult coloring books because, like, as you can see, we draw our own things. I've never actually bought an adult coloring book, but I know they're very popular. They're very soothing and calming and help a lot of people's mental health. So,
Or you haven't found one that's adult enough?
this is true. We need to find stimulating adult coloring books. If you know of any, please comment away.
Or how about we just make one of our own and sell it on Inky Memo, right?
I think that's for the offshoot website, which we will let people figure out the name of. It rhymes with Inky Memo.
Yes, we have a very dear contributor, who has even come up with the name. So in time we'll also share that.
Now, I think Minjal said that the Luna specifically would be very good for lettering, and I think that's something we need to cover, the differences between the different brands. Vishal is right in that Prismacolor is a very popular brand of color pencils, especially in America. From the little I've tested between these brands, the Staedtler ones are the most waxy and also the hardest as far as the strength of the pigment is concerned.
There you go.
There you go.
But yeah, you need to really pressure it a lot to break it.
Yes.
Versus, I believe things like Prismacolor are more popular with people who do more kind of colored rendered art because it's much more of a powdery, almost I guess a pastel like, and I mean chalk pastels, that pastel. That sort of consistency, which makes it much easier to spread it over a large surface. Whereas the Staedtlers are great for, as Minjal said, writing and maybe more kind of hatching kind of coloring like this. So it really depends on the way you like to use a color pencil as
Yeah,
to which one would suit you.
I had a great time doing this. It was much better than I thought it would be. It mixed better, so I actually leaned into that. I was expecting to keep them as discreet as possible initially, but I think it worked a lot better close together than I thought it would.
And from what I've read, Faber-Castell is also a great option. But between these and the Faber-Castells, the Fabers are slightly softer, so they let you have more of a spread, slightly more like the Prismacolor. But I believe as far as the watercolor part of it is concerned, these are considered to be better. And
Okay.
from whatever we have tested, I found them, these are probably the best watercolor ones I've ever tested.
Yeah, my experience with watercolor pencils, as they were called back then, was a Derwent set when I was in school, and those were pretty much unusable as pencils.
Yeah.
You just put them down and hope for a line, and then you'd put water in there, and they wouldn't actually mix all that well. But this is 20
Yeah,
years ago,
the
so-
thing that I find excellent about these pencils is that they work perfectly as a dry
Right.
color pencil. But then when you do mix them, they give you something that genuinely looks like watercolor. So that's a great balance to have.
Right. I think we have colorfully looked at these color pencils enough for now.
You've geeked out about paper, if you like that sort of thing.
Yeah. We've broken a few things, which is always a good sign. I think we'll be coloring and covering more colored mediums in the future. Let us know what mediums you like to use, whether it's color or otherwise. If there's some sort of weird color pencil you get in your area, I'm not even using a pencil here, it's just stuck to my hand. Because we've seen, these are obviously a good branded color pencil from one of the best known names in all stationery. But there are really cheap ones out there as well that are pretty bad actually, but
Yes.
you can still do some things with them.
Yes.
They're sticks of plastic with wood around them.
Yeah, I mean, you're not getting this range this easily on any paper with those.
But on the other hand, like last week we covered the Hauser fountain pen, which is one of those cheap pens that just works really well. So it's possible that in your part of the world you have a color pencil that's really cheap and very reasonable, but is also really good. So do let us know, because we love finding these little gems.
We're always on the lookout for more stationery that we can test drive and or also just know about, even if we can't get our hands on it. Do show us what you have made with it, just like we have shown you what we have made with the Staedtler Luna 137 with a paintbrush and a decal that also says 13 HB. No, it says HB8, I think, or IB8. I can't even quite read that watermark or embossed mark. Get 12, get 24 if you're. Hey, get 48. Your life is yours and color it the way you want. Until next time, sign up for Inky Memos newsletter. Have a look at our products on the website, the notepads, and there are other products in the pipeline that are being tested
And clearly now we need to work on coloring books.
Yes, there will be some kind of Inky Memo coloring thing, I'm guessing, fairly soon. And yeah, we'll go off to work on that and our next episode. Until then, I've been Vishal.
I'm Samir.
I'm Minjal.
We don't have a tagline to go out. We keep trying to make new ones, but I don't know. I guess color things between the lines, outside the lines. Do what you want. You're an adult.